Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and remember Nun, when he departed in wrath, he imagined that we had no power over him, but he cried through the depths of darkness, and there is no, and said, "There is no God but you. Glory is to you. I indeed wronged." This is the story of Yunus alayhi salam, right? And this is a very, very famous dua of Yunus alayhi salam, which a lot of people say that it is in Surah Yunus. No, this famous dua, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin. This is Surah Anbiya, ayah number 87. It is the dua of Yunus alayhi salam. Now, Yunus alayhi salam was an amazing prophet, alhamdulillah, right? So let's just look at his story a little bit. First of all, just the Dhunnun, yani the man of the fish, Yunus alayhi salam. If you look at the letter Noon, what scholars tell, this is just a point of interest really. What scholars tell us is that if you look at the letter, Arabic letter Noon, right, it is for a whale or a large fish. And if you look, keep in mind Egyptian hieroglyphics, what scholars say is that when fish comes out of the water, it bends actually, and there is a drop of water on top. So that is how the letter Noon actually is. See, in Arabic, there's this curve and there is a drop, there's this nukta over here, which is like the drop of water. Wallahu alam, right? And scholars also tell us that the surah that begins with Noon ends with the story of Yunus alayhi salam. But they also say Allahu alam. So, and the last part of this ayah is the dua of someone who is imprisoned. Now let's look at Yunus alayhi salam. Sayyidina Yunus ibn Mata alayhi salam appears in the Quran in Surah Yunus, Surah Al-Anbiya, Surah Safat, and Surah Noon. At some places, he is mentioned by his real name, and at others by the title Zunnun, like over here, and also Sahibul Hud, like over here in Surah Al-Qalam in ayah number 48, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Yunus alayhi salam, فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ وَلَا تَكُنْ كَصَاحِبِ الْحُوتِ إِذْ نَادَى وَهُوَ مَكْرُومٌ. Yeah. So remain patient with your Lord's judgment and be not like the man of the fish. He cried out while he was in anguish. It is because of this episode of Yunus alayhi salam being in the belly of a fish that he's called Shahib al-Hud or Runnun. So according to the commentary by Ibn Kathir, Yunus alayhi salam was sent to preach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message among the people of Nineveh, which was a township in the region of Mosul. So he was also a prophet of the Bani Israel. So Yunus alayhi salam invited them towards deen and asked them to follow the true deen and perform good deeds, but they rejected his call and behaved in a very arrogant and defiant manner, which was really the characteristic of the people of Bani Israel. Being dejected and annoyed, Yunus alayhi salam left the place after warning them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath is going to come upon them within 3 days. Now he took this decision himself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not ordered him to do that. Right? After he departed from the town, people realized that the warning might come true. And according to some versions, the nation, his people actually saw signs of the impending disaster. Right? So they repented and asked pardon for their sins, and the entire population retired to a forest with their cattle and animals. Then they started lamenting and bewailing and invoked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness and protection. So basically, they turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sincere tawbah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted their sincere tawbah because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He will accept sincere tawbah, right? And then they were released from the fear of the impending disaster. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever azab was in store for them, that actually didn't come. Now, while all of this was going on at his in Nineveh, Yunus alayhi salam was waiting, expecting the news of the destruction of his nation. But when he learned that the storm had passed and the people were safe and sound, he worried that they would regard him as a liar. So according to some versions, it was customary with his people to execute a person if he was proven to be a liar. So therefore, Yunus alayhi salam feared for his life and decided to go away to some other place rather than returning to his own people. So he came across a river on his way and boarded a boat to cross it. While crossing the river, it so happened that the boat was caught in a whirlpool and was in a danger of sinking. So what the boatman decided was that if one of the passengers was offloaded from the boat, the chances were that the rest of them would be saved from drowning. So they cast lots because they used to do that in those days to decide who should be offloaded. So Yunus alayhi salam's name was drawn every time the lots were drawn, right? So it happened like a couple of times. The second time and the third time as well, his name was drawn. So it was like 3 times that his name was drawn, and he was then pushed off the boat. And then what happened? A fish from the Caspian Sea, says Ibn Kathir, arrived on the scene as commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and swallowed up Yunus alayhi salam. Right? This is also reported by Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala. Now, because it has to be a large fish to swallow a human being whole. So that is the reason people say that it was a whale, most probably, or a very large fish. So the fish was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he was not to be taken for food, like he would not eat Yunus alayhi salam, and no harm was to be done to his body, both his flesh and bones. And he was only to be held as a prisoner in the belly of the fish for whatever period of time. We really don't know what period of time it was, right? And then from within the belly of the fish, he cried out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know, if you read over here, fanada fil zulumat, yani so many darknesses. He was within the belly of a fish. It was probably pitch dark. Yeah, he didn't have a torch or a source of light. And then the darkness of the sea, because the large fish usually go in the depths of the sea because they're large. So out with so much darkness around him, and the darkness of his depression, the darkness of feeling scared actually, and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he had kind of disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a little bit. Yeah, we cannot say that prophets are sinful, but Yunus alayhi salam definitely made a mistake, and he was fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what are the consequences going to be. So in that depth of depression and darkness and of being isolated, etc., he cried out to his Lord, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin. There is no God but you. Pure are you. Indeed, I was among the wrongdoers. Right? Now we have absolutely no idea how many times he made this dua. We have absolutely no idea for how many days he made this dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not told us that. What Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, which is in Tirmidhi, that the supplication of Zunnun, when he called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside the belly of the fish, was this: there is no La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin, and he referred to Surah Anbiya ayah 87. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, verily, a believer never supplicates for anything with it, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer him. Yani, if you are in any kind of trouble, if you are in any kind of a tight spot, then pray with this dua, and inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reply. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will respond. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer. Right? So this is the hadith and this is the dua. But we have made such a 3-ring circus out of it, haven't we? Have you heard of this? Which is called Ayat al-Karima. Right? La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin. And then a lot of people get together and they get these seeds or something, right? For counting. And they say that if you read this dua, God knows how many times. I don't even know exactly the count is, but it's a ridiculous count. And when you do that, everybody together like a communal thing, so which is like a form of pressure group, to pressurize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to listen to your dua, and then your dua will be answered. Now there are some people who even say that this is a very Jalali wazifa. Jalali meaning that it's a very strong and formidable dua. So we need to read it with, like, you know, they put the tasbih in water. Quite see, I'm not joking. I've heard this, and this happens. They put tasbih in water to cool it down, and then they do dua on this tasbih, and again, God knows how many times. Like I said, we really don't know how many times Yunus alayhi salam called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What were his feelings? You know, dua is all about emotions and feelings and reaching out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has not given us a specific number to recite or read anything, then we should stick to that. If you, it is a personal dua. Yunus alayhi salam was alone, right? Yunus alayhi salam was absolutely 100% totally alone in the belly of the fish when he called out. So we need to take lessons from these beautiful ayat of the Quran, that when we call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's not make it into a circus. Let's get deep inside of us, like Yunus alayhi salam was probably did, right? And called out in distress to his Lord with emotion, with feeling. And like we said, Wallahu alam, how many times? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to use the du'as of the Quran the way they are meant to be, and not just as some mumbo jumbo.